then what I anticipate, obviously I'll upload the video at the end of this session, and I will probably send you a copy of my PowerPoint, because I'm not going to show you all the slides that are on the PowerPoint, so you can have a look at those as well, and that'll help you. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so everybody see. So safeguarding module, the first bit, I just put that in, explaining your own words what safeguarding is. It's not a thing that is really needed in the thing, in the test. Oh, there's Leanne. Let's wait for Leanne to come in. And I will give you a definition of that in a minute, so that you can have a look at that. And then again, current legislation and guidelines. That will fill on that big sheet that I sent you. Morning, Leanne.
I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm having a crazy morning.
It's okay, we've only just started and I've recorded it literally. So yeah, so this bit 1.1 and 4.1, you'll fill on that big sheet. So current legislation for safeguarding confidentiality, data protection, disclosure of information. And that is all on, let's stop sharing, just get the other screen up. This goes well and then doesn't go well. And that you will find on the first page of the module 5 on the VLE. So this is your legislation. This would go under guidelines. And then any school policies would go under policies. Okay, so legislation, policies, guidelines, and then your school policies.
Sorry.
The big one to remember is the United Nations Convention of the Rights of a Child, because that is the one that all safeguarding legislation stems from. And that was, it was introduced in 1989 and we signed it in 1991. And there's a brief summary document there. Funny enough, the only country that hasn't signed it is the United States of America. Bit useless information there. So that's all on that front page, and I'm just going to get my Word document back up. Can you see the document again?
Not yet.
No. I have to stop sharing and then share screen and go back into the document. Okay, so that's that bit. This bit I might come back to later this morning if we've got time. If not, I've got some notes on the thing. So it's obviously safeguarding and welfare requirements are met through statutory policies. So like every school needs a safeguarding policy or a child protection policy. It might be named differently depending where it is. And then things like anti-bullying policies, behaviour policies, they all come under that bit. But so I'll go into more detail if I get back to that. This one, 2.1, you might be able to fill that in yourself, because if you've got children, you will know those signs and symptoms. If you don't, you can look them up and there are links on the VLE to that information. So you literally just need signs and symptoms. And it's just some of the common childhood illnesses. If you want to be up to date, you could add COVID-19 to the bottom, but you don't have to. And then on this one, it's just listing some signs of when a child's ill. So you know yourself what things they might go floppy, lose their appetite, fever, pale, those sorts of things. Just need to do a list there. That's quite an easy one. And then you've got some case studies. And these are looking at what you would do if you've got a young child who's been taken ill or suffers a minor injury. So you might want to look at your school's first aid policy. They may have a separate policy, or it might be under the health and safety policy, and see what you would have to do if you were working in that school and a child had an injury. So you just list down what actions you would take, and there's just a few different scenarios like bump heads. Okay, and then the next bit is describing what action you would take in these situations. So fire, security, or missing child or young person. Again, look at your school's health and safety policy or fire procedures or security incidents. They'll probably be listed there. A lot of it's common sense. And again, first aid if you had a real medical emergency. But so might come back to some of these later. So I'm going to stop my share for a minute and get my PowerPoint up. Okay, so I think the key thing with the safeguarding is that it's everybody's business, everybody's concern, and everyone's responsibility. As and when you begin to work in a school or for any length of time, you will have to do safeguarding training, and it'll be every year. So if you've done some of that in the past, you'll be okay here. I think too long people think, oh, it's not my responsibility to report any concerns, but you can do it anonymously, and if it saves a life or saves a child suffering, you need to do it. So these are the definitions. So safeguarding is promoting the health, safety and welfare of all our pupils. Responsibility of all adults, and that includes people that work with them, volunteer with them. So if you helped out in brownies or guides or any other extracurricular activity, you have still got an obligation to safeguard the health, safety and welfare of all pupils. And then child protection is part of safeguarding. So often get lumped together, but there's slight variation. And child protection is to protect those children that have already been flagged up as being at risk. So they've already in the system for some reason or other, perhaps because there's issues at home, domestic abuse or whatever. And that's a slight difference. Safeguarding is everybody. Child protection is particularly linked to those children that are deemed to be specifically at risk. So I'm not going to look at the videos. The videos are all on the VLE, otherwise we'll end up having a huge long session, and they don't always run very well. But a key statistic, 1 in 5 children have suffered abuse of some description. And that's quite a horrific number. So what do we class as child abuse? So there's a definition there. It's an action by another person, and it could be an adult, it could be a child. And that might seem not relevant about a child, but if you look at the further reading booklet that's on the VLE, there is a bit about peer-to-peer sex abuse. So children abusing other children sexually. And unfortunately, it's happening quite a bit. And so it can be physical, sexual, emotional, and we know the neglect as well. So 4 main categories: physical abuse, which is quite self-explanatory, but we'll look at it in a minute. Emotional abuse. This one is harder to determine because it's not as evident as physical abuse. Sexual abuse and neglect. So, anybody got any idea of signs that you think would possibly indicate something's going wrong in a child's life?
Personality change.
Yeah.
Bruises.
Bruises.
The child doesn't want to go home at the end of the day.
Yeah, it could be. Child doesn't want to go home at the end of the day because something's happening at home. Okay. Sorry?
I was going to say like losing weight, like changes to their...
Yeah, changes to their physical appearance, losing weight. Could be gaining weight if they're comfort eating because of a certain thing. So these could include unexplained changes in behaviour or personality, becoming withdrawn, seeming anxious about anything. They could become aggressive. There's their way of hitting out. May lack social skills, have few friends. Might have a poor relationship with their parent. Knowledge of adult issues that are inappropriate for their age. And I've come across that, sadly. I had a reception class and I had a little, well, so what were they, 4, 5? And I had a girl in that class who at playtime, I had separate playgrounds, but she would go up to the junior playground, the edge, and chat up the boys. You know, quite sexually advanced. I had an 11-year-old boy that was watching inappropriate pornography. You know, so it's, we have to be careful what we do. Running away or going missing. Choosing to wear clothes that cover the body, especially in the summertime, or reluctant to get undressed or changed in PE or anything like that. And they're common signs. They could be an indication of any of those 4 categories of abuse. So you've got to be very careful when you make assumptions, because there could be other things going on. There could be mental health issues, which are a big concern at the moment as well. So physical abuse, and here's some statistics. 8,000 children had counselling sessions between 2016 to 17 regarding physical abuse. I couldn't find any more up-to-date figures than that, but I should imagine they've probably kept the same or potentially gone a bit higher. And it's just important to remember that physical abuse is any way of intentionally causing physical harm to a child. And it also includes making up the symptoms of an illness or causing a child to become ill. So you might have heard of Munchausen syndrome, which is where a parent insists the child is ill and there's actually nothing wrong with them. So we've mentioned bruising for physical abuse. So obviously bruises. And bruises are usually in places where they are not evidently visible, because the abuser will try and cover up that they're actually abusing the child. May have broken or fractured bones. Again, you need to be careful though, because if you've got a child that's got brittle bone syndrome, they're going to have lots of broken and fractured bones. When you consider if physical abuse is happening, you've got to look at the wider picture. Has that child got any illnesses that might be a cause of have these symptoms? So bruises, if you've got leukemia, usually bruise easily. So you've got to think about how this is going to be done. Burns or scalds, bite marks. The burns or scalds could actually include cigarette burns. People do it on their arms. And then health problems such as or injuries with old scarring. They might have been poisoned in some way. I might have breathing problems because of being drowned or suffocated or poisoned at some stage. There's quite a few symptoms and signs of physical abuse there. So the effects of physical abuse can be very, very long lasting, and it will, potentially could lead to poor physical and mental health later in their lives. You don't really need to know these, and you don't need to record them, but it's for your own knowledge, really. So things like anxiety, behaviour issues, criminal behaviour, depression, drug and alcohol problems, eating disorders, either not eating or overeating, issues at school because they just can't settle. Mentioned that sort of goes with the eating disorders, obesity, risky sexual behaviour, suicidal thoughts or attempts. Oh, gotta go back there. So all of these, it's a child's way of actually calling out for help in a way. So if you get any of these symptoms, they could also be a sign of mental health issues. So this is where you need to, if you've got any concerns, we'll look at how you report it and record it. It's then up to the designated safeguarding lead to decide what action is going to be taken. Is it a sign of something else, or is it actual physical abuse? It's knowing the family, what the family are like, and looking at the whole picture before you make any jump to any conclusions. So sexual abuse, these have jumped 57% in 5 years. Anybody got any ideas why they might have jumped up so much? No.
Social media?
Yeah, it could be the media. It could be more people are actually reporting things, whereas in the past it might have just been brushed under the carpet. I don't know. That's startling. 200 child sex events on average every day last year. And this one, this was last year, 73,518 recorded offences, including rape, online grooming, and that is a big issue now, obviously, because we use multimedia devices so much more than we used to, and sexual assault. And we'll come on to sort of e-safety later when we look through this. So girls are 4 times as likely to be victims. (8,000 offences committed against 14-year-olds. So obviously we all know teenagers are going to be susceptible. That's quite startling. 12,374 sex crimes recorded against children under 10. And 449 offences were recorded against babies yet to reach their first birthday. That's quite sickening, isn't it? So there's quite a few types of sexual abuse. There's two types, contact and non-contact. And then there's branches within each of those. So obviously contact sexual abuse would be your actual sort of sexual intercourse, being touched, that sort of thing. The non-contact would be like grooming online or verbal. So sexual abuse includes grooming, and that can be done, say, face-to-face, or it can be done online. And they basically manipulate these children to take part in activities. And, you know, anybody could do this. It could be another child. It could, we tend to think of adult men, but actually it could be anybody. It could actually be a female as well. And there's been cases of that in the past. They might be a family friend, or they could just be somebody that they've got attached to. And children that are likely to fall into this area are those children that perhaps haven't got any friends. They're looking for a relationship with somebody, and they just hook up with the most inappropriate person without realizing it. And then once they're sort of been caught up, so you think about all the you heard about all the cases in Yorkshire. Are you all aware of those cases in Yorkshire where young girls were groomed, sexually abused by ethnic minorities? And don't want to label them all in the same boat, but you know, different cultures have different views of women. And even though they're in this country and should be living to our standards, they're sometimes ingrained in their culture, and that's where some of these issues happen. And child exploitation, sort of similar to grooming, they're exploited to do sexual activities in exchange for gifts, drugs, monies, whatever. As I mentioned before, these could be done online or face-to-face. So what do we think about signs of sexual abuse? What would you give you a think about? Could be a potential sign.
Inappropriate behaviour.
Yeah, inappropriate behaviour. Any others?
If they've got like physical signs like bruising and things like that.
Yeah, it could be bruising in unexpected, you know, sort of intimate places.
Like not wanting to get undressed at PE.
Yeah, it could be again another sign, not wanting to get undressed. So avoiding being alone or frightened of a certain person. That language that you wouldn't expect to hear from a child, or sexual behaviour you wouldn't expect them to know. And it always seems to come out at weird times. You know, they could be just playing and something they say just sends alarm bells ringing. Nightmares, bedwetting. If they're a bit older, they might start to misuse alcohol or drugs. They might self-harm. Again, potentially older children. Changes in eating habits or changes in their moods.
Excuse me.
Oh, bless you.
Thank you.
And physical signs, obviously, you've mentioned it, bruises, bleeding or discharge or pains or soreness in the genital or anal area. So I had a little girl when I was doing my first teaching practice. I think it was my first teaching practice, reception class, and this girl constantly was rocking on her chair, sort of almost that motion. And I mentioned it, and they said they thought, or they were thinking, that she may be a victim of some sexual abuse because of that constant rocking on the chair sort of thing. So sexually transmitted infections, obviously pregnancy if they're old enough to fall pregnant. So they're the main ones. And obviously then again, the effects of sexual abuse, they're going to be the same things that we've already mentioned. So you're going to have all those things. But again, I say these could be signs of mental health issues as well. So then emotional abuse, probably the hardest one to sort of determine, really. So you could have psychological abuse. And it's deliberately trying to scare, humiliate, isolate, or ignore a child. And it's almost a form of bullying. And there's a figure there, 27 reports of emotional abuse every day. And risen by 200% in 7 years. They're also saying that lately that domestic abuse, being a witness to domestic abuse, is almost tantamount to emotional abuse, because you're being, witnessing the domestic abuse that's happening to your mum, dad, or whoever, and it comes under sort of the emotional abuse of a child. So emotional abuse, as I mentioned, humiliating or constantly criticizing a child. And sometimes we do that unintentionally, but it's being done on a day-to-day basis to make that child feel really worthless, or that young adult. Call it, again, on a one-off basis or a couple of times, it's nothing. But if you hear it all the time, that they're threatening, being threatened, shouted at, called names, and so this is where this could be a form of bullying as well by another child. Making a child a subject of jokes or being sarcastic. Blaming a child, making the child a scapegoat. And some adults do it because of potential gender or colour or culture, because they just don't understand it. Other children will do it for the same reason, because they've picked up on their parents doing it, and it just it's a continuous cycle. Make a child perform degrading acts. Not recognising a child's got their own lives. So some some families, because of their culture or their religious beliefs, are really controlling about a child's life and won't give them the freedoms. So again, some religions like Pilgrim Fathers, they tend to marry other people with that same religion. They don't have the chance to go out. You can think of perhaps children that get sucked into any sect, or parents get sucked into a religious order, and their lives are literally taken over. Pushing a child too hard or not recognizing their limitations. So some parents have very want their child to achieve academically and push them too far. So you could think about there was a while back, can't think of her name, child that went to university at 13 or 14 because she was so academically gifted, but actually it ruined her life, and in the end she severed all ties with her parents just to get away from that academic pressure that they were putting on her. I mentioned this one already. Exposing a child to situations that they shouldn't really see, like domestic abuse, drug taking. So failing to promote a child's social development, so not giving them the opportunities to meet friends, perhaps go to clubs, that sort of thing. And that's what goes into that one, not allowing them to have friends. Persistently ignoring them. Or just being absent a lot of the time. Manipulating a child and never saying anything not kind. No positive feelings or congratulating the child on their successes. And unfortunately, you do come across parents like that perhaps should never have become parents, and their way of dealing with it is just ignoring the child. Sad, but true. And not being emotionally expressive, so not giving them cuddles, kisses, keeping them at arm's length, and that's emotional neglect. So a lot of children, thinking back a few years, you may not have heard of them. There's lots of orphans out in Romania, and when the people from outside Romania became aware of them, they were literally just dumped in cots, and they had no stimulation, no cuddles, nothing. They were literally just put in cots and left, and just their basic needs being given to them, like changing clothing and giving them food, but nothing else. And that would be emotional abuse. And as I mentioned already, these may not be obvious until they become a real crisis. But again, say it could be a mental health issue. And obviously, as children grow older and they have different experiences, their emotions change. And like we mentioned in the child development section, if they're going through a transition, something's happened to them, like, I know, the dad's died, or their parents getting divorced, their emotions are going to be all over the place. So again, this is where we need to have a knowledge of the whole child and what's going on in their life. And if need be, having that conversation with their parents to see if it's just a time of their life that they're going through, they're finding it really, really hard, or if there is something more further happening. And a lot of children will seem unconfident or lack self-assurance at some time in their life. So this is where it's very difficult to determine if it's emotional abuse or something else. And all these things. So all of these could be a hint to emotional abuse, could be because there's something traumatic happening in their life at that time, or it could be they're being bullied by another child or children within the school. And these are all going to become the same. So wanting attention, becoming clingy, risky behaviour again, have trouble controlling their emotions. As I said, this could go on into later life. And interestingly, they have higher levels of depression and health problems as adults compared to other children that have experienced other types of abuse. Because I think that is because, you know, emotional abuse is so difficult to pinpoint. And again, the same thing, self-harm. Language development, if they're being ignored by their parents or not establishing those family contacts or friends, they're going to have language development problems. So there's quite a lot on that list there. But you can see there's lots of similarities between the different types of abuse, the signs and symptoms and the effects, which is why it's so difficult sometimes to determine if it's abuse or something completely different. And neglect is a big one, and this is the one that often ends up coming in the press. And it's where it's literally you're not meeting a child's basic needs. So they might be hungry, they might be dirty, they might not have proper clothing, shelter, supervision, or healthcare. And these put children in danger. And there's a difference, you know, I know we've got some children that are, you know, potentially living in poverty at the moment, but usually those parents will try and support their children as much as possible, whereas this is actually a complete failure to do anything for them. And these are the cases that usually come out in the press. So 1 in children have experienced neglect of some description. And neglect is the most common reason for having that child come under the Child Protection Action. And that's, again, quite 4 years ago, but I wouldn't, potentially it probably hasn't changed. So 26,000 children were identified as needing protection from neglect. And neglect is a factor in 60% of serious case reviews. So if a child dies while because of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect, they have to have a serious case review. And that's where all the parties that were involved in that child's care get together and they find out what went wrong. So often when these come into the press, so like you might have heard of Baby P, Victoria Climby, and some other high profile ones, it's often been a failure of all the parties to actually work together. So perhaps the school not telling the social workers, or the social workers going round to the house, the parents being very good at persuading the social worker that there's nothing happening, and then the child is found dead or taken to hospital and dies, and it all comes to light that things weren't put into place. And again, there's a story of Michelle on the VLE that's worth sort of listening to. So obviously physical neglect, as you mentioned, is just not giving children the food they want, the proper clothing or shelter, or they're not properly supervised. So I think in Victoria Klimby's plate thing, I can't remember, I think she was found in, or when she was taken to hospital, she was very malnourished, had bruises, sort of like rashes on her where she hadn't been properly cleaned, and those sorts of things. It could also be a parent not letting a child go to school. There's a difference between, you know, if you're homeschooling, obviously that's not educational neglect because you're homeschooling, and the number of people that are actually homeschooling is rising because of COVID-19. But it's not letting them have any education, so just not sending them to school at all. And then obviously emotional neglect, which sort of comes onto the emotional abuse, not giving them the nurturing that they need, the stimulation they need, and again, it's ignoring them. So they might be, I don't know, locked in their bedroom and just ignored, isolating them from other experiences. And then obviously medical neglect, not taking them for dental care, vaccinations, refusing to take them to a doctor if they're ill, ignoring medical recommendations. And again, that one, we've had some cases in the past where children have been treated for cancer and the doctors have said there's nothing further we can do, and parents ignoring that and doing their own thing. So that would come under that sort of framework. So obviously children that got a neglect, poor appearance, hygiene, they're probably clothes are sort of ragged, not appropriate for the time of year, might not have a coat in the winter, might smell because they haven't washed, they're being smelly or dirty, being hungry all the time, so not turning up at school with any lunch or not being given any money to get lunch. So that sort of goes with the other ones, unwashed clothes. Health and development, they might have things like anemia. They might have very poor muscle tone or very prominent joints where they're very thin. May have other medical or dental issues, and they might have poor teeth because they've never been to the dentist. They might have rotten teeth, toothache, things like that. Then obviously living in an unsuitable environment. So it could be squatting, or in private housing that is in such a poor state that it's not, should be condemned. Being left alone for long periods of time when they're of a young age. Anybody know what the law says about being left alone? At what age you can do it?
I don't know, is it like 11 or something?
There isn't actually any laws.
There isn't, okay.
No, it's really down to a parent thinking that, you know, making sure that their child is capable of being left alone and left alone safely, and having support networks in place in case things go wrong. You know, I don't think anybody would leave their child alone under the age of, say, 11 or 12, unless it was a real emergency, but it's been left alone for a very long time without any suitable support or you know, contact for anybody else. There could be a carer for other families and members, which means their actual health is neglected and things like that are neglected. There is a lot of support for young carers out there, but again, it's only if social welfare or school is aware that this child is a young carer, that they can put that support in to help them. Otherwise, you know, if nobody else knows, they could be neglecting their other bits there. Changing behaviour, becoming very clingy, or becoming aggressive. So the complete contrasts. Withdrawn, depressed, anxious again. Changes in eating habits, displaying a possessive behaviour. So again, these are common to all of them, really. I'm going to mention bullying but I don't think it's actually in your workbook. So you've only got to look at physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. But if you wanted to, you could add a bit on about bullying, because it is such a hot topic, and just for your own knowledge. So obviously bullying, as we've mentioned, is any sort of behaviour that hurts someone. So this is where you've got that overlap, because name calling could be emotional abuse, hitting could be seen as a physical abuse, as could pushing, spreading rumours, or threatening or undermining someone, again, is another sign of emotional abuse. So you can see that there's lots of overlaps in thinking about abuse and safeguarding. And again, it could be at school, it could be at home, and it could be online. And it's obviously repeated over a long period of time, and could cause physical or emotional damage. And we think of bullying as being mainly for children and young people, but it can be young adults. It could be us as adults being bullied as well, you know, in the workplace. So it stretches from any age right across. And again, there's a video on the VLE that's just worth looking at or listening to. So we've mentioned some of these. So physical bullying, verbal bullying, non-verbal abuse, so making inappropriate gestures at somebody, or using text messages. Emotional abuse, exclusion, so just ignoring or isolating somebody. Cyberbullying, and this is the big issue these days. And again, there's some information in the further reading pack about cyberbullying and case studies. I don't know why I put a link there. I might put a link in there for a reason. Oh yeah, cyberbullying. The cyberbullying is obviously using any sort of media, so text messages, sharing embarrassing images or videos, trolling, so menacing, upsetting messages through social media like Facebook, chat rooms, or online games. Excluding children from online games or activities or friendships. Shaming someone online. setting up hate sites or groups about a particular child. Encouraging young people to self-harm. So there's been a lot about children managing to get hold of or links to sites where self-harm is promoted, and yeah, they sort of get sucked into it. Being pressured into making voting against somebody. Creating fake accounts. Sending explicit messages, which is known as sexting. Obviously, pressurizing children into sending sexual images or engaging in sexual conversations. Oh. And I was going to say here, where this one, encouraging young people to self-harm, there's also been children that have managed to get links to sites that promote suicide, because they're feeling very vulnerable at the time, they get sucked into that. So you know, it's a huge issue with social media and bullying through social media, and this is where schools need to make sure that they've got very good policies in place to make sure the internet's protected at school, and why they have rules about, you know, phones in school, use of phones. And it's also educating us, the parents, about the issues with some of these things and being aware of the safeguards we can put in place to protect our children. I'm just going to go back a bit. Yeah, that one. Does anybody have you know, concerns about social media and bullying and cyberbullying? Do you think you're well prepared to deal with it, those issues, as and when your children use social media, phones, or anything like that?
I think schools talk about it a lot more now than probably they did when social media was starting to become more common.
Yeah.
I mean, my daughter's in reception class and already they've like had a leaflet and lessons talking about bullying.
Yeah. Do you feel you know enough about cyberbullying and things that you can do to protect your children when they use those things, you know, use phones or social media? Because I think the schools are, you know, they have a role to play and they need to educate children about these. But I think sometimes they also need to educate the parents and get them in and keep them up to date with things that are happening. So there's been a lot of controversy about TikTok lately. You know, it's being aware of which websites can be can draw your children in, that might look particularly innocent, but actually have a sinister background to them. And I think, again, in the further reading folder, there was there's a list of the 10 websites you should be wary of. And it's just been keeping up to date with these things. And I think the adverts on telly, there's Internet.org that keeps up to date with all these things, and it's there as a resource for parents, and they have links to things for children as well. So it's been just be aware of all those things. So effects of bullying, you know, obviously we've mentioned all of these lately. So mental health issues, feel they're not accepted by their peers and things like that, and it can really last into adulthood. So much so that they actually become wary and suspicious of others, and find it really difficult to form relationships because of their experiences in the past. And it might just, school refusal comes into that. If they're being bullied at school, they could refuse to go to school. And all schools should have a good anti-bullying policy in place. And it should be very explicit about what it will do if an instance of bullying has been noticed or recorded. It's also, it could have an impact on those children that actually witness the bullying. So we must remember those as well. I'm not going to go through this, but it is on the VLE. Just to be aware, I don't know how many of you are actually aware of the PREVENT strategy. And this comes under safeguarding. You don't really need to know too much about it, but I will mention it because it will come up if and when you work in the school. So the PREVENT strategy was put in place after 9/11, and it's there to stop. I don't know if it's coming. It's basically people that work with children or young adults need to be aware of the signs of radicalization. So people that have been lured into extreme behaviours. So we've all heard of the people that have gone out to join the jihads out in Asia, that sort of way. And the PREVENT strategy is put in place by the government so that if schools notice a child has got signs of radicalisation, and the 2 videos on the VLE will explain it a bit more, that they have a duty to put that to the PREVENT strategy, and they get together with a group of people that include the police, schools, health visitors and other people to see if determine if this child is actually being radicalised and putting steps in place to stop them being dragged further into it. So when this was first brought out, it ended up with quite a lot of children being reported as being radicalised just because they said one comment. And there was an incident up in Manchester, somewhere up there, where a child had drawn a house and the teacher had asked her what the house was. And she said, I can't remember what the words were she said, but she said something and the teacher jumped up and said, oh, she's being radicalised. So
Sorry.
Right. So the police were sent round and everything. And the teacher had misheard what she'd said. So it's, putting these things into place. So there's a lot about that at the moment as well, and that comes under safeguarding umbrella. So radicalisation. So you can just look at the videos and just learn about it. If you really wanted, you can do PREVENT strategy training, and it's free via the government website if you're interested. But the 2 videos will just give you an idea of what it is and how it all works. What part does education play? This is where schools now have an agenda with, when we looked at values and aims, you might have noticed on some school websites they mention British values. And to help stop this radicalisation, schools are supposed to promote the British values. So they're on the school websites, and so during lessons, assemblies and that, they're supposed to promote those British values. And when that first came out, people in the street were asked, well, what British values were and what things do you think they might have come up with? They came up with things like cups of tea, queuing, fish and chips. They were seen as British values, which wasn't what the government meant. It meant things like democracy, the freedom of speech, those sorts of things. So it's quite interesting that we ourselves couldn't see what the British values were. So what do we do if we think or suspect child abuse? What do you think we always need to do?
Report it.
Report it, yeah. So you need to report it to the designated safeguarding person. So when you're working in a school or volunteering in a school, you need to know who that person is. It's usually the head teacher, but it may be somebody else. And it will be written in the safeguarding policy who the designated safeguarding person is. And you should report to them any possible signs or changes that you're worried about. If a child tells you anything, you should take it seriously. You should not ask them any questions that will lead them into saying things that they might not actually mean. So you need to listen to them, write down what they say as much as you can, or if you can't do it then because you haven't got any paper, do it as soon as you can afterwards. You've got to reassure the child it's not their fault. Children and young people very quickly blame themselves for things that are happening to them, and it is not their fault. And we mustn't tell them that we can help them, because we can't give them false hope, okay? But you've got to tell them that you can tell somebody else that potentially can help them. So you mustn't take this on board yourself. You haven't got the training, and it's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to report it, listen to the child, and that. As I just mentioned, write down what you've observed or been told and keep the information secure. So again, if you've looked at a school safeguarding pack, there's forms in there. There's probably a body picture. So if you see any bruises, you mark on the body picture where the bruises go, etc. You do that and you give it to the designated safeguarding lead. So you never promise to keep their information safe, because you've got a legal duty to pass it on to the designated safeguarding lead. As I mentioned, you don't investigate yourself. You don't ask them further questions. You literally just take down what they have said. I know this one's difficult, but try not to appear too shocked. Okay. So, as we mentioned, don't make promises to them about anything. And obviously, you only tell the designated safeguarding lead. You do not tell any other children. Staff. You don't tell any other staff, regardless. It's a conversation between you and the designated safeguarding lead, and then a designated safeguarding lead takes it from there. They would do the contact with external providers, the police, parents, or whoever they deem necessary. Okay. And it's very explicit in the safeguarding policies, and let's say, well, you have safeguarding training. So you need to remember the 5 R's. Recognise it. So if you recognise any signs of abuse that are worrying you, yeah, the odd bruise on a child is nothing to be concerned about. But if they're those bruises seem to be in the same place on a consistent basis, that you notice when they're getting changed for PE or whatever, then obviously you need to do something about it. So recognise it, respond. So that response isn't talking to the child unless the child is has decided that they want to talk to you. It could just be going to the designated safeguarding lead and saying, look, I'm concerned about so-and-so, seem to have a lot of bruises or whatever. You know, do we think we need to do anything about it? So that's respond and that report. They sort of go together. And then obviously record anything as soon as you can. It can be on a scrap of paper or anything until you get the proper record. But obviously, whatever you record it on, make sure you keep it safe. Don't just leave it on the desk or whatever else, because then you've got a breach of confidentiality as well. And there's huge fines for data protection breaches now. And then obviously the designated safeguarding person, whoever they will be, will refer it to whoever. If this is a child at your neighbour or something, you can report it straight away. You can all the numbers for any issues regarding safeguarding of children or anybody else that you might meet outside of school are on the on the Wiltshire Government website, and there's a whole bit on there about safeguarding and looking after children. You may have concerns about staff. Now, all staff, even volunteers in school, need to have a DBS check. So even though I work with soldiers, and most of them are probably over the age of 18, I still have to have a DBS check because I might work with soldiers that are literally 16, 17, come out of basic training. So all staff should have a DBS check, and they're checked on a regular basis. But some people do manage to slip through the system and get into school that shouldn't be in school. So if you're concerned about a member of staff, you think a member of staff is acting inappropriately with a child or with children or whatever, again, you must report it again immediately to the designated safeguarding person. Or if it's that person, you could go directly to the local education authority. Okay. It very rarely happens, but this is when you're working in a school, you've got to think about your own safety and never be with a child on its own with the door shut or wherever. So even if you're giving first aid treatment to a child, you should have the door open so that people can see you. You don't want to put yourself in that position where people might have suspicions about your behaviour with children. And that's the key thing. It's remember your priority is the safety of the children child that you're looking after. So if you've got any concerns, talk to the designated safeguarding person. And that's just a link to Wiltshire website where they've got lots of information said about safeguarding on there as well. So we've already mentioned e-safety, and we've already mentioned it's a key part of the school curriculum. And we really mentioned why it's important today. It's because social media has taken off such a huge place, and especially now when we're obviously under COVID-19 restrictions, children are using Zoom meetings, using technology a lot more. So it's about making sure that you've got all those things in place that will help them stay safe. And again, it's about being aware of it if you're working in schools. So obviously children shouldn't be using computers on their own. There should be somebody in there keeping an eye on them. Most schools, I say, will have good firewalls in place which will prevent inappropriate websites getting through. But there was a case 2 or 3 years ago where a teacher was doing an internet search with his children, and I think they were just looking up pictures of dogs, and something inappropriate came up, and he was actually sacked for it. But actually, it was the school's fault for not having a strong enough firewall in place to prevent that happening. And even where I work, we get some websites that are I use on a regular basis, and suddenly they get blocked because for some reason they seem to be inappropriate. And it's these are all those things you've got to be aware of. So Twitter, WhatsApp, all these things. Have you got parental locks on things and that to help them stay safe?
Sorry, that's my door. I just
And again, your school will have an e-safety policy. So it's worth having a look at it to see, because I think it's on 3.5 you've got outline how e-safety could be implemented in the school college. So if you look at a school's e-safety policy, it'll tell you what things they put in place to ensure your child is safe. So things like firewalls, making sure people have got the appropriate training. So look at a policy. And then again, there's a video on e-safety on there. And we've mentioned cyberbullying, so I'll go through that. Can't think what's on my next slide. And I think the last bit, 4.2 in your booklet, are situations when confidentiality can be breached. Now, there's only some situations when this can actually be breached. So any information a school collects is confidential. It should be under lock and key. It should only be accessed by those people that actually do need it. My husband's a school caretaker, and I went into school one day at the end of school to pick him up, and I just happened to glance on the reception desk, and there was a child's contact details on there. Now, I could have taken that further and could have reported them for a breach of confidentiality, but I just put a great big sign on it. Do you realise this is a breach of confidentiality? And you could be fined up to £10,000 for any breach of confidentiality. So, even the learners I work with, it's like thinking about when you send an email, you should only have 2 bits of information about anybody in that email, in case your email's hacked and they can get still that information off of it. So it's things like that, and being aware that any information should be under lock and key and not shared. So the only time you can breach confidentiality is when it may result in the harm to a child or a young person. So again, if you think there's something's going to happen to a child, report it to the designated lead. They can report it to the police and they can deal with it. Or it could result in a crime being committed. So if you hear, I know, perhaps a teenager saying that they're going to steal some drink from Morrison's or wherever, you've got a duty to report that to the police. Okay, or it may result in serious harm to an adult. So if you're, worried about a parent at school or anything, and you think something's going to happen, again, you can report that straight to the police. You can breach confidentiality. If a child is subject of a court order, it could be something like they're not allowed to be picked up by a particular parent or a particular adult, and they turn up, you need to alert the authorities straight away about that. You shouldn't let the child go anyway, but just, you need to let them know that something that's happened. Or if you think a crime is going to happen and it's not going to be detected, you can breach confidentiality. And they're the only cases you can breach confidentiality. I don't think I've missed any. No. So they're the only times you can breach confidentiality. Other than that, everything you hear about or see in school has to remain confidential. It's a bit like signing when you become a soldier or work at the army. You have to sign the Official Secrets Act. You can't divulge any information. It's the same in schools. So that was a real quick run through there. I'm just gonna I'm just gonna stop that share for a minute. So the workbook, so this is 3.1. We've gone through all those characteristics. You can put as much detail in there as you want. You know, you've got to remember these workbooks are your own work. And if you want to put more in there because you want to know more about it, that is fine. And if you go on to do level 3 with us, you know, we'll do these again and go into a bit more depth. And we will do a particular bit about bullying. We've looked at the actions to take. And again, you can look at your school's policy and actually write your school's, you know, outline what your school policy says if you want. And we've talked about the situations when confidentiality protocols must be breached. And we've mentioned this. If you, this also falls under the whistleblowing policy. If you could find that, if you do happen to come across a school's whistleblowing policy, that sort of thing will come under there as well. If you've got concerns, what procedures you need to do and who to talk to. And they sort of come together actually. So it's failing to comply with safeguarding procedures, or if you feel they're harming or abusing. So I don't mind if you want to merge those two boxes together, that's fine, because they're about the same thing really. Now we talked about e-safety. And again, if you look at your school's e-safety policy, they might have their own definition of what they class as e-safety. And then you just got to outline the e-safety policy. There's quite a bit in there, and I say you can add, and you could add as much of or to it as you want if you want to. And I'm just going to get the book up. Where's me? Oops. Share my screen. Oh, share screen. Just going to show the further reading booklet. I've lost it. So on the level 2 course, down the bottom here, you may, if you haven't looked at it, there's this booklet. Not playing ball. And it's got sections on everything in it. So if you click through it, I think you'll get adverts down the side, sorry, because it's a free thing. I'll go through it. Come on, catch up with yourself. Not that it's play ball. It's not going to play ball. But there's a section in there on safeguarding. It talks, there's some articles about child-on-child sexual attacks. So literally it's in sections if you haven't looked at it. It's also got some bits about health and safety, and that if you haven't finished your health and safety one. So here, a safeguarding, it's got about child-on-child sex offences you might want to look at. There's a big bit about cyber, staying safe on the internet. And I think at the back, it's got the 10 riskiest websites or apps. So there's lots of figures in there, articles from different things I've got. internet crime, sexual online attacks. So there's quite a bit in there that I try and put on there as much as I can. Sexting, impact of sexting, and 10 apps that you should be aware of. And there might be some more now, and some parental advice. There's lots on there for you. So stop share. Anybody got any questions, or are you all happy with that?
Happy.
Just a quick one, because I might have to take some extra leave. Would you be happy to have another session next week rather than on the 15th? And we do equality and diversity.
I've got to work next week, but I can catch up on the recording.
Anybody else okay, or should we leave it? I'm quite happy to do it on the 15th because I think I'll probably still be working, but
I don't mind either one.
okay. Well, I'll wait and find out what work want me to do about my leave, and then I'll let you know. But I'll send you the links to this video this afternoon, and I will send you a copy of the PowerPoint so that you can see the other slides that we didn't cover. When you look at the PowerPoint, there are some notes underneath, so you might want to look at the notes section underneath as well, because there's some information in there as well, which I would have gone across as well. So if everybody's happy, I'll say goodbye and I'll let you know what's happening. If you need any help, just get in touch. And those people that have submitted booklet 4, workbook 4, I'll try and get those marked later today and get feedback to you. Other than that, I'll see you soon. Have a good week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.